It's very possible the human over there is a guide called the Player. This is incredibly rare.
Rare?
If I had to guess, they're probably playing a game called Megadimension. Maybe it's lying around here somewhere. Look for it.
Nah, I don't have to look for it. I can just ask the player. Player, are you playing the game called Megadimension right now? Ooh, they said yes! You're amazing, Krusty.
Tell me something I don't know.
Hey everyone, today we're going to look at Megadimension Neptunia VIIR. I want to thank our friend Erica Zabo for hooking Michelle and I up with a preview code. She's on a bit of a hiatus right now, but go ahead and check out her channel, which I've linked in the description below. She's got a ton of great reviews and recommendations worth checking out. Neptunia has always been a love it or ignore it RPG series, where you basically knew from one look if it was for you or not. However, despite being such a niche RPG, it's actually one of the biggest RPG series going today. The series only debuted last generation, and to date we've had 4 main entries, 3 portable remakes, an anime, and 7 spin-off games including action RPGs, a tactics game, an idle sim, and more. Unlike many other niche Japanese series, nearly all of the games have been released in English. With this latest entry in the series supporting VR, I expect some players who have a PSVR and never thought twice about the series before may consider checking it out. It's also worth noting up front that the game doesn't require the VR. You can still view all the new content on your TV if you don't have one.
Just watch me!
CPU Purple Heart has arrived.
For the record, I love Neptunia. I find it hard to recommend because it really targets a specific type of gamer, but stylistically I find the series a ton of fun. I've played just about all of these B-tier JRPGs and most of them turn me off instantly, but Neptunia is the one that, despite having similar flaws to the other titles, kept me hooked because of the characters and style. If you've never heard of Neptunia, it's a turn-based RPG that prides itself on pandering to an anime-loving fan base, with a ton of anime eye candy, fan service, and jokes at the expense of the game industry. The game features characters who are magical girls and are the personifications of different game consoles and developers. The main characters each represent systems from the major console publishers, with Neptunia representing the unreleased Sega Neptune. These girls are goddesses of their lands, and always battling over who has the most shares and therefore the most power in their world. But eventually, they always end up teaming up to fight whatever big bad is threatening game industry. The games take place in a multiverse, so many of them are completely unrelated to each other, and even the games that are direct sequels usually involve traveling to another version of the world where things have gone differently. For those interested in the VR aspect of the game, but who haven't quite played the previous titles, you can probably dive in right here. You'll definitely be more familiar with the characters if you played previous games, but overall, the Neptunia series does a great job reintroducing characters to newcomer, and it doesn't really dwell on past events much. This new title, Victory to Relaize, is set up using the player room as its structure. This room, which is in the player's universe, represents your room, and from here you have several options. The first lets you play an updated version of the latest main game in the series. The main story stays nearly the same as the original release, with Neptunia getting sucked into a world that's been completely destroyed by giant mechs. Here she meets the only other living person, the CPU of that version of Planetoon, Uzume, who's based on the Sega Dreamcast. Later, the girls have to deal with a mysterious group known as the Gold Third. Gameplay is true to the turn-based RPG battles and extra systems used in previous main series titles, but overall there's some pretty big changes to the game that may not be noticeable at first. Overall, the game's visuals look better than the original release of Victory 2, but you might not notice it unless you compare the two side by side. Also, the user interface is completely changed, as is how you select attacks in battles. Everything is organized differently, the menu screen and where you find different information, interacting with towns from the map screen, using the scouting system, and more. This is something I find it hard to say is better or worse than the original UI, but I find it personally hard to adjust after putting a fair amount into the original game. For battles, you now choose all of your attacks in a menu before attacking, where in previous games you chose your attacks one at a time with button presses during your turn. The last menu choice you made during the fight is remembered, so you only need to do this once per fight if you want to use the same attacks each turn. You can also modify your choices each turn to do different attacks, but I find this a lot more cumbersome than the original system. Speaking of which, new attacks are purchased through the skill menus by spending money instead of being earned on level up like the original game. I feel like this hampered experimenting with different attacks. You won't get as much moves as the original game up front because you'll be spending your money elsewhere. Speaking of attacks, even though they all have the same names and many of them have the same animations, they don't perform the same. All the stats are different and some of them are completely different, so you can't use your knowledge from the original game just to play this the same way. Quite a few other major changes to the combat system change up how you approach fights compared to the initial game. One big thing is that HP is restored at the beginning of each fight, and because of how SP works now, you don't need to restore either HP or SP between fights. In battles, all characters start with 0 SP, but they restore SP each turn, so you have to build that up before using your big attacks. Also, AP governs nearly all actions. Everything from attacking to skills to item use requires AP. However, you can bank more AP in one turn in order to do more actions in your next turn. You also need to plan carefully to make sure all your characters have banked enough AP and SP in order to do the special combination attacks.
My turn.
Here we
Here
go!
we go! I'll bet victory on this one blow.
To end each turn now, you have to choose a defending action, which can have different effects including countering enemy attacks or building up extra SP. Some of these changes feel better overall, but I feel like selecting your attacks and having to buy skills are a step down from the previous game and really hurts the flow of battles in my opinion. One positive huge change is that you no longer have to manually save. The game autosaves constantly, after every battle, after moving on the map or viewing an event or returning to the title screen, so no more worrying about reaching the next save point in a tough dungeon. The map screen no longer has random battles, there's a sprint option, and you can break destructible items right from the beginning of the game. So overall, the game feels faster and there's a lot less backtracking. The last change worth mentioning is that multiple endings are removed, and only the true ending is left over. So you don't have to worry about getting locked out of that and getting the bad or just good endings instead. But as a trade-off, you can't see the other endings. If you're playing this for the first time, most of these changes won't affect you, and you can enjoy the new systems as they were designed. If you've already played through the original game completely, the battles feel easier, but they're a little less smooth, and you can quickly skip all the scenes, so you can burn through the game in way less time than you originally spent on it in order to see all those VR scenes. By playing through the game, you unlock new decorations for your room and VR events. You also get scenes with a certain Neptune that'll reference what's going on in the main game.
Owie, ow. Huh? What is this place? Oh? I'm so sorry. The circumstances that caused this are complicated. But I think this is pretty customary for the series, and in 3D space, if you're not slightly above the floor, the collision programming won't register and you might end up in an alternate dimension and...
Hey, calm the hell down!
You can head back to the player room at any time where you can check out your VR options. In the room, you can change your decorations, which basically just means changing the color of some pieces of furniture and adding different plushies around the room. You can also check out the gallery where you can view images and movies you've unlocked, and you can also review the VR scenes from the main game here too. And finally, you can choose to invite one of the 4 goddesses over to your room. Each goddess has 10 different VR scenes that are unlocked over the course of the game. In each scene, the goddess comes to check out your room and talk to you a bit before leaving. The scenes are actually a good introduction to each character for newcomers of the series, but because of the context of the room visits, the full range of their personalities don't really come out. Blanc is the one that really stood out to me, as they really focused on her shy, awkward side, which felt out of place after playing so many games where they play up her quick to anger and vulgar side. In these events, you do have some limited movement. You can move forwards and backwards a little bit, or to each side, and turn to get slightly different angles of the room and the girls. If you started in a chair, you can stand for a higher view or sit on the floor for a lower view. As long as you have enough room for the camera to recognize your position, you can basically change your view in a couple different ways that work out pretty well. During these sections, you can also nod or shake your head to answer questions and hear different responses. There are times too where focusing on a specific highlighted point will change the response you get. Overall, I enjoyed the VR events. You do get to know the characters a bit more, and it's an interesting way to see how they act when they're not always mixed up in whatever's going on in the games. But I felt like there should have been a bit more depth to them. I would have liked to have seen more action in the room, more decorations, maybe some animated ones, just to see more happening. Maybe add some more story beats to what's happening in the player room as well, so different aspects of the character's personality can come out. I would have definitely liked events with multiple characters, maybe even some events with a transformed version of the girls. There are around 50 of these events total, so other than the conversation, there's not really much to differentiate them from each other. So when it comes to recommending this, I think if you're a Neptunia fan, you definitely have to check it out. Even if you don't have a VR, those extra scenes are enough extra content, and you can always check them out later with a VR if you pick one up. If you're not a fan of this kind of anime style and are only interested in the VR aspects, it's probably not something that's going to appeal to you too much. However, if watching this has kind of piqued your interest or gives you a second thought about the series, I do recommend you check it out because it's a good entry point in the series and you may really end up liking the series once you give it a shot.
32-bit Mega Blade.
Megadimension Neptunia VIIR 2 Relaize releases on May 8th. There's also a limited edition exclusive to the Idea Factory online North American store, which includes an art book, plushie, and more. So thanks again to Erica for hooking us up with this game. I'm still going to have to pick up a physical copy on release for my collection, but it was great to check it out early and see how Neptunia will translate into VR. If you're not familiar with our channel here, please check out our other videos and subscribe if you dig the kind of stuff we do. We mainly do quick looks at import games that were never released in North America, and retrospectives where we go through every game in a series or a console's library to call out which games are notable and that you should check out. Thanks for checking out this preview, and I'll see you guys next time.
I'll come back again soon, okay? See ya! I'm sorry! I almost left here with your game! Okay, seriously now. Later!